Part 2 on geeking out on email deliverability. Hello and welcome to the Sales Podcast. I'm Wes Schaefer, the Sales Whisperer, your host. This is your home on the web for honest, no hype insights, advice, and inspiration to help you sell more, faster, at higher margin with less stress and more fun. When I got out of the Air Force in 1997, I had a wife, a baby, another one on the way, and I had to put food on the table, which meant I had to be productive. I had to be efficient. I had to be successful at making sales, and I was. Over the next decade, I continued to succeed in various industries across the country, even across the world, which led me in 2006 to starting the Sales Whisperer. Since then, I have built a big business and a big family, and I have fed my family, provided for them based on my own skills, my hard work, my dedication, my insight. And now I give you this podcast as a free tool to help you learn what I have learned over 20 plus years. Another free tool that you can use to grow your sales is available over at thebestsalessecrets.com. Head on over there, and it's over 21 pages of advice, things including the 7 keys you need to apply to win at sales, how to look at money, and the true purpose of the sale. So again, head on over to thebestsalessecrets.com for that free tool. And now on to the show. John Morrison, the technical email wizard from ActiveCampaign, calling from home, your home base in Chicago. Welcome to the Sales Podcast, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Wes.
Well, thanks for coming on. You know, I had mentioned before we turn on the recorder, you know, I'm in a Facebook group for ActiveCampaign, and this question has come up. It got really detailed just the last couple of weeks. But I've had and kind of battled with this email deliverability issue forever. I mean, I've been in this space since 2008 as my own business, really probably going back to 2006, not long after I started the Sales Whisperer. I was working with a very small local company doing this. But can you help us dispel some of the myths about email deliverability? Let us know, you know, some technical things that we can do, and then, you know, what should a consumer, you know, expect from their ESP when it comes to deliverability?
Sure. So we're of the mindset, and it's kind of controversial in some sales circles, but that it's really much more about quality than it is about quantity.
Okay.
So it's about sending really good content that to people who are expecting and want that content. So more than anything, we think that is going to make or break where you're going to wind up if you're going to get blocked altogether, whether you're going to wind up in the inbox. But of course, there's a lot of responsibility on the ESP side. Of course, you know, that's our end of things. But just like I said, that philosophy comes into things. That is largely about what we allow to be sent. So with our service, you know, we've got hundreds of thousands of people who are using our service and trying to send emails, and most of them are great. And we have to be pretty strict about keeping the spammy senders off there. And what that ultimately does, it means that if we only have people who are, you know, this is kind of simple, but if we only have people that are good senders, we're going to develop good sender reputations for our servers. So it's ultimately going to be the content of the message and who it's going to. So if you want good deliverability, the first thing I'd say is make sure that your list is up to date, is accurate. You know, if you haven't sent to these people in a while, maybe run it through some list verification service. There's some shady stuff in that market, but you know, you can be careful. Good companies like Bright Verify will go through stuff and give you a pretty good list, clean out stuff.
So what is that, Bright Verify?
Bright Verify, BRITE Verify, VERIFY, .com. They're a list verification service. You can take your mailing list, throw it in their service, and they charge you, you know, a fraction of a penny for each address, and scales depending on how large your list is.
Okay.
And they'll go through and they'll weed out the bulk of the bounces. Now, it's not perfect. It does a good job, but it's going to ensure that when you send, you're going to be sending generally to only people that are real addresses. But taking that back to the beginning, if you're having to go to something like that, you probably did something wrong to begin with. And not trying not to chastise people, but you generally want to be engaging with your contacts often. You want to be expected to be engaging to them. So if they sign up for your mailing list, you want to be contacting them, and you want to be contacting them on a regular schedule with things that they're anticipating, things that they want. Fairly often, the people who we see who wind up with poor deliverability are people who, their business has been operating for 5 years and they've been collecting email addresses, and now they want to send an email after 5 years. And it's like, yeah, a lot of those people are going to totally have forgotten that you exist. Their email addresses aren't going to exist anymore, even though that mail service might not exist anymore. I see people all the time who are looking to send to like SBC Global email addresses, which they exist, they work, they go to an AT&T or a Yahoo address, but that's probably not someone's current address. So you want to factor that in and be constantly engaging with your people. Now, you don't want to be annoying. You don't want to be sending too often, but that's going to depend on your individual market and on your individual content.
Yeah. Well, people love me, so I send everybody an email about every 30 minutes. Is that too much?
Depends. I mean, if people like your content, they might want every 30 minutes. But yeah, there's technical stuff as well, but it's really going to come down to developing a good sender reputation. It's going to come down to, when you send to Gmail, for example, right? We don't know this for a fact because Gmail is very opaque about what they do. They'll tell you that they filter some things based on mail server, but we have pretty good indications that they filter things based on the sender as well. Now, this is a little bit of speculation, a little bit of hypothesis. But so if you are sending to, let's say, 1,000 Gmail people, and only 10 of those people are opening, their Hive logic is going to look at that and say, hey, this person's sending very often to a lot of our people, and they're getting very low opens. And that's going to, we think, increase your likelihood of going to spam. And, if you're getting high opens, they're going to increase the likelihood of you going to the inbox, the good inbox, not just the promotions inbox. So we're of the mindset of, re-engage with people, try to filter your lists down to people who are actively engaged, and then try to send content that's going to get those people actively engaging, because the longer you do that, the better a reputation you're going to garner. And the more likely you are to get better results.
Okay. So
the people that we see that do the best are the people who have that mindset.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that the sender reputation of the ESP servers are important. Who is monitoring this reputation? I mean, is there an email police? Is there an email committee? Or is it like individual, like Yahoo tech wizards are sitting in their basement, scanning and monitoring, and and do they share that information with other, big providers like Gmail?
So, great question. There's not one central body of governance on this. There's lots of independent small companies that manage blacklists and things like that, and they're very rarely handled these days by just manually people blocking things. It tends to be more based on what's called spam traps. And a spam trap is when you send to an old list and somebody has bought a domain, and they've set up basically nets. I mean, I'm kind of butchering the technical end of this to the explanation, right. But they set up that if you send to one of those addresses, they know you're a spammer, because that is no longer an active address.
And who's they? Yahoo?
No, not Yahoo. We've seen that Hotmail does this with their own stuff. So if you have addresses that really old Hotmail addresses that are no longer active, and you send to that, they notice that, and they can snap back and they can try to block a mail server, or they can block a sender or delay mail being received. Uh-huh. But there's lots of small companies that do this. There's lots of, I don't want to sit here and name names as far as tons of them. You can look at MX Toolbox and you can find just a huge listing of different blacklist providers, and many of them are not commonly used. They're individual companies that maybe some corporate enterprise is gonna license. For example, as far as we can tell, Apple with their me.com stuff, they use a company called Proofpoint, and Proofpoint will find messages that they deem as spam, and they'll put out snaps of blocks on mail servers or delay sending for a bit. And we track that, we monitor that. We have different indications when something like that occurs. We look at that and we say, okay, what's happening? What caused this? We go track it down, and we respond accordingly to make sure that it, mitigate a damage to a sender, for example.
Yeah, I think all you ESPs are just in collusion, man. I think you're on the beach right now somewhere, and you just don't want to send my emails.
I wish that would be a lot easier. No, it's interesting. There's a lot of different things out there that are doing this, and there's a lot of different services that it's so spread out that sometimes it's hard to tell. We have people on our team, and I'm one of them, that monitors our bounce logs, for example, so that when you send an email and it goes out and maybe 5 of those people, their addresses no longer exist, we get a bounce message back into our system. And we actually parse through those and we say, okay, why did this bounce? And what caused it to bounce? Is it actually because the address is dead, or is it because of a block? And we investigate all of those. We screen everything that goes through, and we send, millions of emails. So it's pretty cool. And it's not, you're looking for a needle in a haystack with those things, but it allows us to see, hey, suddenly, Cox is blocking a bunch of stuff. Why is this happening? And then once again, go in and mitigate that sort of thing. And very often we'll trace it back, and it's to a specific sender that, is sending maybe something inappropriate or somehow slipped through our compliance stuff. And we track that down, and we deal with it accordingly pretty quickly. But that's ultimately what's going to be the end of it on our end, is we've got to monitor that. We've got to be meticulous about that, and we've got to keep the bad senders away from the good senders.
Right.
So that's not on you guys. What you want to do is be a good sender. Now, there's other things you can do as well. You can go ahead and try to build your sender reputation. That means sending consistently from the same address, obviously sending good content, but there's other things you can do to build your address, build your sender reputation, because you're sending from our mail servers, and we're not of the mindset that a dedicated mail server is the right thing for every person and every account, and that's a whole different conversation that if you want to have, we can have. So we move accounts from server to server. Not all the time, not frequently. It's not like your one send is here, your next one is there, but we move things to load balance. We move things to say, if, for example, a server were to get a block on it, we move people off of there because we don't want to damage your sending, of course. And we want to keep, if somebody's suddenly sending bad content and they're on a server with a lot of great senders, we don't want those great senders to be impacted by that, so we're going to move them off. But what you can do is you can take more control over that. We give you options for you to set things in your MX records, to set DKIM and sender ID, SPF things that basically allow your email to authenticate off your own server to verify who you are. And that can help develop a sender reputation. It's also going to, of course, matter what links you're including in there. So if you're including links to your website could be blacklisted. It could totally be, you could be on a great mail server with us. You could be sending beautiful content to people who really want it, and your individual domain could be on a blacklist, and that could cause all of your stuff to get hosed.
How would someone know if their domain is blacklisted?
Generally, you're not going to find out about it. So that's the scary part. No one's going to tell you on that. You've got to be monitoring that yourself. So
how do you monitor it? I mean, what would I do to see if my website is blacklisted?
MX Toolbox is a great mxtoolbox.com, they're a great website. You can type in a domain there, and you can see where it is on a blacklist. And they usually will show you there. You can log in and I think pay them to try to track down how to remove the block if possible. But typically it'll give you the name of the provider, and you can Google search them and go find, hey, I'm being blocked by so-and-so company. And they usually have delisting things you can do to actually request on their own website.
Right.
You can also set up what's called, why am I blanking on the term? RBLs. You can set it up so that if your thing gets blocked by certain providers, you'll get messages, real-time blacklists.
Okay.
And that'll actually, for example, I think Juno, the company, there are a couple different companies, Juno, Net Zero, whatever. They're not really so huge anymore, but they have, for example, a thing that you can set up with them. And if you were to get blocked on their server, you'd get an email about it, and you could go and contact them and try to get off of it. So I would recommend setting up that sort of thing on anywhere you can find it.
Okay. So you mentioned something else. Yesterday I got into it on the SPF setup with Entreport, but we didn't get into DKIM. Can you elaborate on that?
It's largely the same thing, or it's parts of the same thing. Okay. We have a great article called "Removing the Sent on Behalf of" header on our help docs, and it goes into these. DKIM, Sender ID, and SPF are three different ways of verifying the sender across a domain. Now we handle that for you. Okay. And we do this on our own end.
You handle the DKIM or all of that?
We handle all of that on our own servers, and we authenticate against our own servers.
Okay.
But that's why when you see in the message, sometimes when you get a message from an email marketing service, it's going to say something like "sent on behalf of ActiveCampaign test." It's going to have a server email address and then "sent on behalf of" and the person's email address. And some people don't like that, and most places don't even show it. Gmail will show it. Some versions of Outlook show it.
I want mine to say, John Morrison approves this email. Can I get that set up?
I don't know of a way. We do allow some custom headers. I think you might be able to do something tricky with that.
All right.
But if you can manage that your own DKIM and Sender ID, you can authenticate it off your servers instead of ours. So this means you're sort of agnostic of our server. So if we move you from server to server from time to time, this is still going to authenticate off of your server, and it's going to build your reputation for your server and for your sender ID.
So this DKIM, so that's something that I can do myself?
Yeah, it's something called domain key. Okay. But in our settings on our service, I'm not sure how other providers have done this. Not every provider offers this. But there's a way in our settings, advanced settings, to we say, let me manage my own email authentication. Mm-hmm. And then you would we generate a key for you on these things, and you can copy those and paste them into your MX records in your DNS settings on your host. So if you've got, you're with GoDaddy or Namecheap or whoever, you can go and put these into your MX records and say, this thing points to this key. And then when you send the email actually includes that key and verifies it with the domain.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And there's a link. Can you give me that link, or can I look it up easily?
Yeah,
included on the.
It's in our help docs.
Okay.
The header. It's activecampaign.com/help/removing the sent on behalf of header with dashes in between all of those.
Okay.
But if you did a search in our help docs for sent on behalf, you'd find it pretty quick.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So everybody talks about, well, before I get into how people can improve their own writing, or if you have recommendations, talk to me about bounces, because, I see things like hard bounce, soft bounce. What's the difference? And then I mean, if it's a hard bounce, that means they're just gone. And basically, I should probably just export that list and just delete them out of my software.
Generally, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have to delete them in our system. You could just move them to bounce. They're not going to count towards your sender limits or your account limits. And we handle that for you. We're going to move people to bounce for you. In our system, a soft bounce, if you get 3 soft bounces, we count it as a hard bounce. So a soft bounce is that when we try to send something, send an email, and the receiving mail server sends back to us that either the mailbox is full or we're not getting anything back, like we're not getting any indication that it's online, so we'll try it again. A hard bounce is when we get something back that says, nope, this doesn't exist anymore. Now, that's not always the truth from the provider. They can have blocks on things. Typically, it's going to be content-based. An example of that would be, if something is looking for individual words and messages and just arbitrarily blocking that. We see that from time to time. And sometimes we'll just respond back and say, nope, this email is not accepted. We have a great article about hard versus soft bounces, and it goes through all the different bounce codes, okay. The ones that you would see in your report that tell you, some sort of indication. But the truth is, the bounce code is set by the receiving mail server. They choose what goes there. And when I mentioned going through our bounce parser, we can screen through all that, but anyone can set that up. They can have it say whatever they want. They can put any code they want. So the receiving provider is not even always going to be honest about that. They might just say, email not allowed. And that could mean any number of things. It could mean that the person's email address is dead, or it could mean that they're blocking a whole server, or that they're blocking based on content. We don't always know unless people are following those codes, and that's entirely voluntary. So we have an explanation of what those codes are, and most people use it. But we'll sometimes see that something will say, email blocked, or address does not exist, or domain does not exist, and that's not always the truth. So you want to go through those, but you don't want to obsess over them either, because if somebody's putting that stuff up there, it's not always going to be worth your time to try to track this down. And it might be outside of your control. And it might even be outside of our control, because sometimes something can get blocked and give us no information, and we can try to track it down, and we can contact that provider if we can, but they're not always going to respond to us. Right. And they're not always going to let you know or us know what service they're using, why something was blocked.
Right.
So there can be walls in that. And the other thing to consider is that blacklist service, they're a business. And, they're a service that we think is a great idea. We hate spam. We really do. Our system really exists to try to keep people away from sending spam. But they're not in the business of delisting. Places will delist, but their whole job is to exist to block things and to say, hey, we didn't let these messages get through. And a university, a hospital, or some institution is going to hire that to say, get rid of all these messages. And they don't care who you are, and they don't care what your message is, unless their client cares, which is unfortunate.
Well, if they knew me, they would love me, and they wouldn't block me.
Well, they would love you if they knew about you, but they're just going to see, hey, this person's sending emails and it's not getting through. We don't care. So you have to have a good justification of, what your content is, what you're sending, how these people opted in, and you won't run afoul of these problems most of the time. Now, sometimes there's just going to be things like a hospital or a government institution just going to blanket block things, and there's just going to be nothing you can do about that. But that's why you usually want to be sending to people's home addresses, things like that. And most of the time, if we see people sending to things like .gov email addresses, that's a flag to us, because most people don't opt in with their .gov email address. They're going to opt in with their home email address or something like that.
Did you see there were a bunch? I want to say like 15,000 or maybe more, like .gov, .edus on that Ashley Madison list.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody got some splaining to do.
It's some scary stuff.
Oh, man. So what's the deal with Hotmail, AOL, MSN, Yahoo? I mean, those seem to be the biggest ones that I personally have issues with. Bounces. And I'll get a spam complaint, and I'll reach out to people because sometimes I'll scan my list, and somebody that I know, I'm like, A, why'd you opt out? B, why'd you mark it as spam? They're like, I didn't do that. I mean, can that happen automatically?
It can, but it's really rare. And we don't usually see it from those providers. What we do see very often, and it's sort of unrelated to the general topic here, but definitely related to what you're asking. We see a lot of the times people will like in a message and they'll forward it around to their friends. And then what happens is one of their friends clicks the unsubscribe link.
Oh.
And that will knock them off the mailing list. And sometimes that friend will even mark them as spam. So we try to, discourage people from doing that and encourage them to click the forward to a friend link and include those in your messages. It's a great way to share the message. It's a great way that you can send it to your friends and they won't opt you out of their mailing list, But yeah, we see that regularly. There's like a webcomic that uses our stuff, and apparently people think it's very funny. It's a great webcomic. I actually even subscribe to their mailing list. They get people all the time who get unsubscribed from it because, mom gets the email and sends it out to 10 different people, and there's an unsubscribe link in the footer of that just somebody clicks and is like, I don't want to get these messages. Yeah. And they're not realizing it wasn't sent from us to them. It was sent from mom to them.
I can't tell you how many people they'll reply to me, take me off your list. I'm like, there's a button at the bottom for that.
All the time.
Like, good grief. People will get so mad. I had somebody not too long ago, last month, 2 months at most, opted out, marked as spam, and I looked her up. And she had opted into like 3 things of mine, right? So, I mean, she's gobbling up my content and then all of a sudden opts out and marks as spam. And I'm just scratching my head. So like, am I on candid camera? Am I being punked? Is Ashton Kutcher going to jump out of my computer and say, I got you?
So with instances like that, I mean, yeah, you're sometimes going to have malicious users, and it just is going to be the case sometimes. It's usually not what happened, though. Usually what we see is that somebody signed up for something and didn't expect to receive a mailing list with it. And I don't think that's what you're doing here, Wes. But what sometimes people will do is say, hey, give me your email address for my free report, and I'll send you this report. And then they don't, people honestly have no idea that they're going to start getting a newsletter after that,
right.
Which sounds silly. But just the extra step of letting somebody know, okay, you give them the email that sends them the free report. Right. You can also say something along the lines of, thank you for subscribing. I'm going to send you the newsletter. If you don't want to get it, click here to opt out.
Right.
Giving people an easy way to get out is going to be a really good thing for you long term.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to send to people who don't want you.
Sure.
Because if you do, those people sometimes can get angry about it, and they can go and take your email address and your server address and your IP, and they start submitting them to blacklists. And people don't ever think about that. So, right. Yeah.
Man, that's vindictive right there.
Yeah.
Oh, well. So what can people do? Are there courses on writing, on marketing that you know of or you recommend? Because I run into this a lot. And I'm a writer. I like writing. I feel like I'm pretty good at it. I get complimented on it. But most people struggle with it. Their emails are junk. They are poorly written. They are kind of spammy. They are infrequent. And then, me being in this business, I want them to keep the software. I do my best to help people pick the right platform. It may be Aweber. That's all they need for $19 a month. They may need ActiveCampaign and the automation. They may need HubSpot. I'm going to help them make the best decision, and I need them to keep it, because I get recurring income from that. But man, it's always pointing the finger at someone else, right? Oh, it's not my fault, that dang company, they just take my money. It's like, well, buddy, your stuff is bad. It's like
Sure.
really bad.
Sure.
I mean, how can they get better?
Yeah, so I don't know off the top of my head of courses specifically for writing emails, and that's actually a really interesting idea. I'm sure there's somebody providing it, and if there isn't, there should be, because it's probably a good money-making opportunity in that regard. But one of the things that we offer on our enterprise plans, and that's the high end of our stuff, is that we have consulting in that regard. We're going to do one-on-one training with you, and we would sit with you and go through your content, go through whatever you're looking to, either about the software or about, even doing some research on your market and talking about how do we engage with these people, and try to figure out what content to send. Now, obviously, we see, typically when I see things that fail, I see one of two things. I see a message that is them trying too hard to make it look like it was sent as a personal message, meaning just sending it as plain text on white background with a little bit of text and some blue links in the middle, and then trying to do like a billion returns to try to hide the unsubscribe link. That fools nobody, and it looks spammy, and mail spam services look for that sort of thing and will increase your likelihood of going to spam. On the flip side, to see the other thing is that people try to do messages where they overdo it with images. It's just like huge graphics and big logo text and very little text. And they think that that's going to do the whole thing because there's a limit to the number of fonts that you can use in an email. There's very few that are basically allowed. So people want to do those things as graphics. Well, when you do that, you increase the file size of the email, and you have to realize that a spam service, a spam check in a mail client is blind. It reads things like a blind person. It doesn't see what's in those graphics. It just sees big image regions. It sees a little bit of text, and it says, this is probably junk. Mm-hmm. And it increases the likelihood of you going to junk. So what do you do in that sense is you want to do something simple and tasteful. You want to do something owning the fact that you're sending from an email marketing service, but not overdoing it. Maybe something with a single header graphic and a good body of text in there and some links. Using the same link 6 times throughout the email is generally going to look kind of spammy. I mean, go ahead. One of the biggest suggestions I make to people, and I don't think I make it enough, is go look through your spam box and look at what those messages look like. If you look like them, you're doing something wrong. You want to try to avoid looking like those messages. There's a reason that Gmail filters those things. It's characteristics in the messages itself. And there's keywords. I feel bad for the people who are in any sort of financial institution or are in sort of, anything to do with loans, anything to do with politics, healthcare, right. Because there's a huge likelihood of you're having almost trigger words that are going to increase your likelihood. We see political senators on both sides of the aisle all the time that send things that have the word Obamacare in it, and they're like, "Why is my stuff going to spam?" It's like, because things actually filter for the word Obamacare in some cases. I don't care about the politics on that aside, but you got to consider those sort of things in there. There are whole blacklists out there. Proofpoint, who I mentioned earlier, that does Apple stuff. They just won't deliver messages. They just disappear things off to the ether if they have specific words in them. Mm-hmm. So you want to be mindful of that. Look through your content, read it over, and then try to read it over in a different mindset. You're going to be so well intentioned. You're going to say, okay, my people are great. They're all really opted in. They're all really engaged, and they all want to receive my things about the dance class company that we're running. And great, that's good. That's wonderful. I'm sure, those people do want to receive it. But just having words associated with dance can get you filtered because there might be something that's also used by porn senders. So you have to be screening for that stuff. It stinks. It totally stinks, and it's unfair. But it's what you need to be mindful of because it's the reality of things. Now, in our system, once again, we'll go through that stuff with you. on the enterprise, we'll do screen sharing with you and go over it. If you send something to just our help and say, hey, this is going to spam, can you tell me why? We're going to give you feedback. It doesn't matter what plan you're on that regard. But then there's also things that we have built inside. So we've got a spam check built into our email designer that parses things over. And it's actually using something called Spam Assassin, which is used on many mail servers to filter spam. And it's going to give you a point rating and tell you, hey, if you have a unsubscribe link that's too close to this other content, that's 1 point. And it's out of 8. In general, I tell people, if you see anything coming up in there, no matter how silly it may seem, try to make it go away. Try to, reorganize your message. Try to make that warning go away. It's not us saying, boo on you, it's bad. It's us saying, hey, your message is matching common characteristics that filter things to spam. Right. You might want to try to get rid of that.
So I should probably use like less Mandarin characters in my emails?
Possibly, unless you're sending to, everybody who's in an area of China that speaks Mandarin.
All right. And I should rewrite my headline that said, hey, do you need a loan because your politician supported Obamacare and now your finances are tough and you're doing the finance dance?
And 100 free spins gambling? Yeah, you should probably get rid of that.
Man, this is tough. This is harder than I thought.
But common things, references to win, references to prize, references to work at home, that sort of stuff will just torpedo your deliverability. And people don't think about it. People are like, hey, I want to send the option to win an iPad to my list, and I'm legitimately going to give away an iPad. That may not be the best idea because you know how many emails are sent out that are like free iPad, free iPhone.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, man. Well, any parting words of wisdom for our listeners? This has been really good.
With anything in the web or with marketing or with sales, content is king. Keep that in mind. Send good content to people who want and expect your content, and you're going to get good results.
And I want it on the record that at me being a writer, I did not pay you to say that at the end, right? Please take your full name for the record and confirm
John
that
Morrison,
I did not make
absolutely
you say that.
Not. I think we're just like-minded on that one, Wes.
Very nice. Where can people find you? Should we send them to the ActiveCampaign site? Do you want to interact with people on Twitter or anything?
Well, so I personally am on Twitter. I'm at local celebrity. But I pitch in on our ActiveCampaign Twitter. We are ActiveCampaign. That's usually the best place to reach us. My Twitter account is about sort of everything. It's general purpose. I'm a web nerd. I'm actually doing some of our user experience stuff. And I have lots of opinions, and they don't represent the company necessarily. But yeah, I'm always open to talking to people. And if they want to talk about email, I'm happy to talk about email. If they want to talk about baseball, I'm happy to talk about baseball.
All right. Local celebrity, huh? Well, look at you.
Yeah. Started as a joke. So.
All right. Very nice. John Morrison, ActiveCampaign, local celebrity. Thanks for coming on the Sales Podcast.
Thank you.
All right, man. Have a great day.
You too.
More about quality than quantity, and content is king. How about that coming from a self-proclaimed nerd? And we covered this as well on the previous podcast that I had with Brendan from Entreport. So there are some technical things you can do. We covered a few different pointers here. ActiveCampaign, John explained how they do things. We got into Spam Assassin, and which is a tool to help. But at the end of the day, send great content. It's really on you. So these are 2 interviews that I did not pre-screen. There were no set questions. Okay, and these guys are saying basically the same thing. And from 2, granted, these are up-and-comers, right? They're not big Marketo or Eloqua, something like that. But these are still major players, serious players in the ESP space, right? Internet service or email service provider space. I know the CEOs of both companies. I've met the CEO of Entreport. I'm speaking there next month. But I've done a lot of work with Infusionsoft for the past 7 years. I've asked them the same questions. So make sure you have good content and quit pointing the finger at others. You feel me? And to see the notes and the links of everything I talked about, visit thesaleswhisperer.com/session 141. That'll do it for today's show, but the learning and the doing now follows. If you would like my help to implement what needs to get done, help you identify what needs to get done and the best path and the best vehicles to use to accelerate down that path, please head on over to thesaleswhisperer.com/IPA. There you will see an overview of what I call my initial process assessment. It's not expensive, but it's not cheap. But like they say, I'd rather spend more than I wanted to than less than I should to grow my business. So if you need some help, if you'd like me one-on-one to help, again, please head on over to thesaleswhisperer.com/IPA. And as always, remember to sell different.